Welcome to the Friday edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 128, and we like Fridays too. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today is October 10th, 2014.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Anglican Unscripted, and we're going to talk about some legal topics. Obviously, got Alan on the side here, so it's going to be nice and juicy legal topic. And one of the things we had in the last couple of days is some undecisions by the Supreme Court, where they did not decide to take up any same-sex marriage rulings or talk about what the appeals courts have done so far. And in doing so, they have, there's a funny Latin word that Alan uses. What's it called again?
Sub silentio.
Yes, to decide without deciding. And this is a decision by the silence. And I thought it'd be a great chance for Alan and I to talk about this because, as people know, we always fight over relationships, conservatives or liberals at the Supreme Court. And, what's all this folly about? What's all the big deal? Well, all the big deal occurred this week because a Supreme Court was asked to take up cases that are important to the society here in America, either the defense of marriage or the defense of same-sex marriage, and they decided not to decide on an important issue. Now, from time to time, courts said, we'll decide later. Like you and I have been going through this church property thing for the last 4, 5, 6 years, and they basically taken the position, well, we aren't going to decide yet. And is that what's happening? The court has decided they're not going to decide yet, or it's really they're going to wait until the Court of Appeals start fighting each other on this? When is the court supposed to make a decision?
Yeah, it's really kind of, I see them as the majority, that is Anthony Kennedy and the 4 liberal justices who decided Windsor v. United States, and prior to that, Lawrence v. Kansas, these 2 cases where they changed the standards. Mm-hmm. With Kennedy and the 4 making a majority, they threw out the old measurement of, when a statute discriminates, you check to see if there's any rational basis for the statute. So, for example, if you say only people 21 and older can drive, well, that discriminates against younger people, and you can set up learning permits and things like that. But the point is, that's a rational basis for that. You want people to be old enough to manage to be able to drive and handle a car properly with experience. So there's a rational basis for that. And so there's a lot of things, and it used to be that marriage also had a rational basis because it went back in thousands of years of tradition, and so marriage was a man and a woman. But what happened was, with the Lawrence v. Kansas decision and the Windsor v. United States just last year, the majority with Kennedy changed that standard to one that says, does it infringe unduly upon personal liberty, particularly in matters of sex? Infringe unduly on, this is what's called substantive due process in the Supreme Court, and it's always had a bad name because, for example, it was used in the early part of the 20th century to strike down labor laws. Mm-hmm. When New York tried to regulate the hours that children could work, and the court said, no, that interferes with freedom of contract, quote unquote. So watch out when a court decides to rule things by substantive due process. It means they're just flying by the seat of their pants and what feels like right to them. And that's what they've done with these recent rulings on striking down the Defense of Marriage Act and striking down the Texas Anti-Sodomy Act in Lawrence v. Kansas, Texas rather. And so with that standard now, it's open season, and the marriage cases have taken advantage of it. It was hopeless. Chief Justice Roberts was in the dissent in Windsor, and he said, well, this doesn't mean, this decision which just allowed a same-sex couple to inherit under the federal laws and get the marriage deduction benefit. He said, this does not mean anything for the same-sex marriage cases. Well, it does, because the standard can be so easily used for that. Once you toss out the definition of marriage as a man and a woman and say it's any 2 people recognized by the state, then of course it's obvious to see how it discriminates, and that's what they've done.
Well,
So all these lower court decisions, there were 7 of them on the plate for the Supreme Court to accept review. Everybody thought they were going to because there's 7 decisions, 3 of them from Virginia, and they were from 3 different circuits, but they all struck down individual bans on same-sex marriage in the various states they came from. And so we thought the Supreme Court was going to accept that, and they surprised us all on Monday by refusing to accept it, which allows now those decisions to stand. And as a result, we have 30 states now see, each of those circuit courts of appeal has many states in its jurisdiction. So if Virginia, for example, is ruled unconstitutional, the same thing's going to happen in Maryland and Delaware and all the other states in that particular circuit. So now we've got about 30 states, and as of yesterday, with the Ninth Circuit deciding in Idaho and Montana, there's add another 9 states on top of that. So we're going to be pretty up soon to a majority of states that are going to be having to have same-sex marriage shoved down their throats. And up till now, it's been on the East Coast and the West Coast, but now we're starting to get into the interior, the red interior.
One of the surprising ones was 5 years ago in Iowa, of all places. Yeah. But that was done at the court level.
It was done at the state court level, but we have Oklahoma now.
Yeah, and now we have Oklahoma.
And that was passed by 74% of the vote or something like that. So those people are not going to take it lightly. And the Supreme Court obviously wanted to stay out of the fray, but what all they've done is given momentum to what's going on, the juggernaut with all these courts of appeal. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see. There's still 3 circuits that haven't spoken, and 2 of them are quite conservative, the 5th and the 11th. And they could uphold, there was a judge in Louisiana who upheld the same-sex marriage ban, and if the 5th Circuit affirms that, we will then have a split between circuits, which is the invitation for the Supreme Court to step in and resolve it.
Well, and here we are, 2014, marriage used to be equal marriage. Any person on the earth could marry a person of the opposite sex. That's equal marriage. It was open to anybody as long as there was consent.
Right.
Now we have undefined marriage. We redefined it. No, you've undefined it. Because now it's only marriage by consent. And that makes it more difficult for the court because all of a sudden people are going to say, well, the 3 of us consent to be married. Why are you going to stop that? Or my brother and I want to get married. Why would you stop that? Because you've allowed consent. How do we pull back on consent?
Right. And when you speak of freedom, individual freedom in matters involving sex, well, that takes, for example, prostitution. How are you going to ban prostitution anymore? Because that's individual freedom in matter. That's a freedom of contract right again. So the substantive due process, as I say, is a very slippery slope that once you open it, it's very hard to stop. And I don't see how they can rationally, in the years to come, prevent polyamory and polygamy, and also prostitution, and bans against incest, bans against close relationships. It's all going to go out the window with this lack of a standard.
Well, I remember it was New Zealand, Australia. 2 men got married just so they could go to a football game. It's just it was an embarrassment to the LGBTQILZY. I forget all the acronyms, but it's once you enter the realm of consent only, you've taken things that are now completely undefined. So let's take a step into the future. We always had this argument whether we should elect a conservative Republican president, conservative Republican Senate and House, because that will guarantee us conservative justices. Now, I have a short-term memory of maybe 25, 30 years, but I remember some very conservative justices turning out to be moderate to liberal in their decisions. There's no guarantee in this, is there?
No, there's no guarantee. And the trouble with politicizing it like that, assuming that is because the court is now turning political. We've got this, with Kennedy being the swing vote, he can sometimes vote on the conservative side with the 4 justices there, and sometimes on the liberal side. And so it's become very, very political with that. And you never know how the court's going to come down, because the four always see things the same way, whether they're conservative or liberal. They vote as a block, and that makes Kennedy the swing vote. So it's not a good way to run the court, and it makes the nomination process so political, where everyone looks to, is he going to be liberal or conservative? They want this fine balance to keep tuned, so that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg retires, for example, then the president has to appoint a liberal woman to the court to keep the balance going.
And he would, but I don't think you could find one as liberal as her. She probably takes the cake. No matter what, you'll be more liberal than Ginsburg. Now, one of these realities is, depending on your upbringing or your global view, you look at the Constitution differently. Some people look at the Constitution as a living document that changes from day to day and can be melded into every situation. Some people look at it more as a structure or a construct of how the United States operates. And we get this mishmash of who do we pick to be in the court, the living document people or the construction people.
Original interpretation people, yeah. Say, how about that? Isn't that shades of biblical interpretation in the church? You have people say the Bible's a living document. We wrote it. We can change it. And you have people say no, it's Scripture. It is unalterable. Same debate, Kevin. Same debate goes on with law and religion in these things, and it's as I say, it becomes unfortunate because the cases really shouldn't depend so much on that kind of a school of thought. And when there's kind of there was a warning issued by Justice Kennedy, of all people,
that's right,
in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where he said, if we overrule Roe v. Wade now, it's only been a few years, and so that you will end up, liberty finds no refuge in a jurisprudence of doubt. In other words, if you can't count on a precedent staying put for a while once the court decides it, then there's really no liberty, because you're at the whim of the court. And that's what's really happening now, because, as I say, once you throw out the rational basis standard and simply go to, well, does it infringe unduly on personal liberty, you're going to, there's no way to control how that comes out in any case, because it's so open-ended. So it will be up to the justices to use their own conscience as a limit.
Which is interesting, because when you look at like the Constitution, we've made amendments that we say, oh my gosh, that was stupid. And we changed,
prohibition.
Prohibition, the fourth, fifth Indian. I mean, we decided, as a country for a period of time that was a neat amendment to have, but now, it was easy to change those, but the court isn't so malleable.
No, it's not. And as I say, it's getting involved in more and more areas where the federal government traditionally has never been involved. And particularly a classic example is marriage. That's always, since the beginning of the country, been an area for the states to regulate and control. And now we have the federal government stepping in through the federal courts saying the federal Constitution requires the states to treat marriage like this. And that's, as I say, that's a total upending of the balance between in federalism between the federal government and the states. And it's not going to be happy times, and I don't know where all this will end. It will only come to a stop when the proper standards when we go back to the proper standards of judging cases and applying things according to an objective, rational standard as opposed to a subjective, open-ended standard.
Well, it's interesting because you brought up the topic early on about 21 being the legal age or driving age or whatever.
Right.
But in that, the federal government still has a lot of say despite the courts.
Oh, yeah.
Ronald Reagan said, unless you move the drinking age to 21, we're going to withhold our money, our federal monies to your road projects.
Right. And that's an improper use of federal monies, but the states are so hooked on federal monies now. It's incredible how far we've come in just 225 years, and it's the question now is whether we can hang on to it or whether it's just going to get more and more unstable as things go along. Once you start jettisoning all the basic things that made the country originally a uniform country under the rule of law, and you start throwing it open to anything to come in and anybody to make some arguments and claim they're discriminated against or whatever like that. I don't know where it ends up because it's not any place good.
So everything you wanted to know about legal news and marriage in 15 minutes. I hope you guys have a good weekend. Thank you, Alan, for your time.